I am not merely a jeweler. I am a poet of stone and light. These gems are my verses. For years I have gathered diamonds from across Europe to create something worthy of Marie Antoinette.
You have outdone yourself, my dear.
Only for you.
This necklace has a strange, mystical power. When I am joyful, its diamonds shine with a cool blue fire. But when anxiety touches my heart, crimson sparks ignite her. France needs ships more than diamonds.
However, fate decreed otherwise. The necklace became a tool for fraudsters.
The secrets are risk in the guards at night.
They dragged her name into a grand scandal. They say it was dismantled, its stones scattered across the world. From legend says to the treasuries of eastern padishahs remained with the Queen's faithful page. Decades later, this stone surfaced in a private collection in Vienna. It was said to have lost its luster and become murky, like a frozen tear. It no longer shone with a blue flame.
Greetings, dear traveler. Welcome to my kingdom.
It was the distant year of 1771, the twilight of the era of Louis the Beloved, when Paris resembled a vast living organism gasping within the confines of its medieval walls. In the shadows of the narrow Parisian streets of the Saint-Germain quarter, with a light of oil lamps barely flickered through the eternal mist and the heavy soot of coal furnaces, lived and worked a man named Charles Boehmer. He was not merely a court jeweler, he was an obsessed alchemist of beauty, a true poet of stone and light, who believed that a particle of divine fire was imprisoned within every diamond. For years, he and his faithful partner, Paul Bassenge, scoured all of Europe for diamonds of the purest water, mortgaging their homes, taking out colossal loans from Dutch bankers, and risking their very lives to create something worthy of only one woman in the world, Marie Antoinette. This necklace, which went down in history as the most fateful and cursed piece of jewelry of all time, possessed a strange, almost mystical quality whispered about in the corridors of Versailles. It was said that Boehmer used secret cutting techniques originating from ancient India, and the stones within it were selected with such devilish skill that they captured the slightest movement of blood in the owner's veins, becoming part of her very breath. When the Queen was merry and her laughter echoed through the Hall of Mirrors, the diamonds shone with a cold, bluish flame, akin to the northern lights, but should a shadow of anxiety or melancholy touch her heart, anxious, crimson sparks would flash in the very depths of the transparent facets, as if in an abyss. Charles Boehmer sincerely believed that this creation, upon which decades of labor had been spent, would become not just an ornament, but a magical talisman for the Bourbon dynasty, shielding the throne from gathering storms. It contained over 600 large stones, connected by invisible gold threads and intricate hinges, so that it appeared not as a solid object, but as a flowing stream of liquid light wrapped around the neck. The construction was so perfect that the necklace moved in rhythm with the pulse, transforming into a living creature of fire and ice. But Marie Antoinette, who possessed not only impeccable taste but also an amazingly fine intuition for the shifting political winds, flatly refused it 3 times. France needs ships more than diamonds, she said firmly in those days when the treasury was empty, and these words revealed her true intellect, dignity, and understanding of state duty, which her critics so often ignored. She sensed that the brilliance of these stones could blind the people and turn their admiration into a violent rage. However, a merciless fate, guided by the hand of the intriguer Jean de la Motte, decreed otherwise, turning the masterpiece of jewelry art into a lethal weapon. The necklace became the center of a grand conspiracy, where swindlers, using forged signatures of the Queen, secret correspondence with the gullible Cardinal de Rohan, and nightly deceptions in the gardens of Versailles involving a look-alike, dragged her name into a sordid scandal. This treasure, which was meant to crown royal balls and symbolize the majesty of the crown, became the beginning of the end and the detonator of a revolutionary explosion. After that fateful night when the deception was uncovered and the shameful trial began, the necklace vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a trail of rumors and broken lives. It was said that Jeanne de la Motte and her accomplices dismantled the masterpiece with an ordinary kitchen knife, and the stones dispersed across the globe like the splinters of a shattered hope. Small diamonds flooded the pawn shops of London. Large solitaires surfaced in the treasuries of Eastern pashas, and some of the purest drops were rumored to have adorned the headdresses of Russian princesses. But legend has it that the main diamond, named the Heart of Light, the very one that could change color according to the mistress's mood, remained with the Queen's last loyal page. On that terrifying night, when a frenzied mob carried the royal family away from Versailles forever, he clutched the stone in his fist so tightly that the sharp facets cut his skin, mingling the blood of a loyal servant with the cold radiance of the diamond. The page swore the stone would return to the heirs, but history dealt a harsher hand. Decades later, this stone surfaced in a private collection in Vienna with a man whose name history did not preserve. It was said that it had lost its famous luster and become cloudy, like a frozen tear or a shard of ice washed ashore. It no longer shone with either bluish or crimson flames, for the heart to which it was bound by an invisible ethereal thread had ceased to beat under the blade of the guillotine at the Place de la Revolution. The stone seemed to have died along with its true owner, turning into an ordinary piece of carbon. But something else is remarkable, often mentioned by historians of the Habsburg family. On the day of the death of Marie Thurs, the Queen's only surviving daughter, the stone was momentarily transformed. In the hour of her final breath, it flared up with that same bright, triumphant light that once illuminated the Hall of Mirrors during the monarchy's best years, as if a mother's soul had given a final sign to her daughter through the cold facet. Marie Antoinette, at the end of her mournful journey, realized what was inaccessible to jewelers and collectors. True treasures cannot be locked in a safe or worn to a ball. Her real necklace, which neither judges nor executioners could take away, was the loyalty of a few friends, her boundless love for her children, and that transcendent dignity she wore with more grace than the finest silk or velvet. The Queen's intellect lay in the ability to see the true value of the human soul behind the blinding glitter of stones. She understood that history would remember not the carat weight of her jewelry nor the cost of Boehmer's work, but the incredible strength of spirit with which a woman meets her inevitable fate. Even when the luxury of Versailles was replaced by the dampness of the conciergerie prison, she continued to believe that true light comes from within, not from cut diamonds. The silence of the old palace and the abandoned alleys of the Petit Trianon still hold the memory of those times when the rustle of silk and the chime of diamonds filled these walls. If one gazes long at the moon's reflection in the stagnant water of the fountains at twilight, it may seem that a cold, ghostly spark flashes at the very bottom, an old legend reminding us of itself, unwilling to vanish into oblivion. But the world moves on, leaving behind the ambitions of jewelers and the dramas of great dynasties. The shadows of kings and queens have become part of an endless narrative we reread, trying to unravel the secrets of the past. All intrigues have long been exposed, dangerous letters have crumbled to dust, and the necklace that destroyed a throne has turned into road dust and thousands of tiny fragments scattered across the planet. All that remains is the memory of a woman who knew the price of radiance and the price of silence, and the soft light of distant stars that look upon us exactly as they looked upon the inhabitants of Versailles hundreds of years ago. The fate of Charles Boehmer himself proved to be no less tragic and fractured than the fate of the masterpiece he created, turning into a bitter parable of how a great dream can turn to ash. When Jeanne de la Motte's grand deception was exposed, and it became clear that the necklace had vanished without a trace, and the treasury did not intend to pay the swindler's bills, Boehmer found himself on the edge of a true abyss. He, a man accustomed to dealing with kings, suddenly realized he had turned into a ruined creditor whose name was now associated not with art, but with shame and the collapse of the monarchy. It was said that in those days he was seen on the streets of Paris looking like a shadow. His once dashing coat was worn out, and in his eyes dwelt the madness of a man who had lost not just money, but the meaning of his existence. The firm's debts amounted to the astronomical sum of 1,600,000 livres, and Dutch bankers, who had once flatteringly offered loans, now tormented him like a pack of hungry wolves. Boehmer's despair was so deep that he resolved upon an act that shocked his contemporaries. He burst into the Queen's chambers of the Trianon while she was walking with her young daughter, and, falling to his knees, sobbed and begged her to buy the necklace or at least save him from disgrace. He screamed that he would throw himself into the Seine if he were not saved, to which Marie Antoinette, weary of his persistence, coldly replied that he should not dare make scenes in front of a child and would do better to dismantle the jewelry and sell the stones individually. These words became the final sentence for the jeweler. His brilliant partnership with Paul Bassenge collapsed. The firm was declared bankrupt, and his property was auctioned off, including the very tools with which he had cut the greatest diamonds of Europe. Charles Boehmer, who dreamed of immortalizing his name, ended his days in oblivion and poverty, haunted by visions of shining stones which, he believed, were soaked in blood and tears. His life became a reminder that even the purest diamond cannot protect against the darkness of human intrigue, and that craftsmanship put at the service of vanity often leads only to ruin and oblivion in the cold waters of history. The fate of Jean de la Motte turned into a gripping and terrifying adventure novel that ended as tempestuously and tragically as it began in the gilded corridors of Versailles. This woman, in whose veins flowed the blood of the illegitimate descendants of the Valois dynasty, possessed not only striking audacity, but a truly demonic talent for manipulation, which allowed her to deceive a cardinal and cast a shadow over the queen herself. When the grand necklace affair was uncovered, Jean did not bow her head before justice. Instead, she turned the trial into a theatrical performance, daringly denying her guilt and accusing Marie Antoinette herself of the conspiracy. However, the verdict was harsh. The Paris Parliament sentenced the adventuress to corporal punishment, branding, and life imprisonment in the gloomy Salpêtre prison. On that terrible day at the Place de Grève, the executioner used a red-hot iron to brand her shoulder with a letter signifying a thief, but Jean writhed so violently that the glowing brand slipped and left a scar on her chest, which she later called martyrdom for the truth. Her stay in prison was short-lived, as mysterious patrons, and perhaps sympathizing enemies of the Queen, helped her make a daring escape, disguised in men's clothing and slipping through the gates under the cover of night. Once in London, Jean de la Motte did not go into hiding. Instead, she launched a veritable information war against the French monarchy, publishing scandalous memoirs filled with poisonous lies and fabricated details of the Queen's private life. These pamphlets, smuggled across the English Channel, poisoned the public consciousness drop by drop, preparing the ground for the future revolution and turning Jean into an innocent victim of despotism in the eyes of the rabble. But retribution overtook her at the most unexpected moment when, seized by a fit of paranoia and fear of French agents, she allegedly jumped from the window of her London apartment. It was said that she saw a bailiff at the door and, taking him for an assassin sent from Paris, threw herself down onto the pavement, sustaining injuries from which she died in agonizing pain. Even after her official death, legends did not leave Jean in peace, giving rise to rumors that the fall was merely a staged act and that she had actually moved secretly to distant Russia under the name of Countess Gachet. It was whispered that a strange elderly lady who settled in Crimea by the shores of the Black Sea kept stones of incredible beauty in her boxes and, before her death, ordered all her papers to be burned so that no one would know the truth about the woman who once held the fate of the French throne in her hands. Jean de la Motte passed away, leaving behind chaos and destruction, becoming living proof that one ambitious woman is capable of crushing a centuries-old empire using only greed, forged letters, and the dazzling brilliance of someone else's diamonds. Her name remained forever inscribed in history in bloody letters as the one who struck the first stone from the foundation of the Palace of Versailles, triggering an avalanche that no one could stop. The fate of the young milliner Nicole Legway, who went down in history under the resonant pseudonym Baroness d'Oliva, became the strangest and saddest chapter in this chronicle of deception, for she was the only participant in the conspiracy whose guilt lay solely in a striking physical resemblance to the Queen. Nicole was a simple girl from the Parisian suburbs, living on odd jobs and possessing that rare, noble beauty that nature sometimes bestows upon commoners in mockery of the aristocracy. When Jean de la Motte accidentally spotted her in a crowd at the Palais-Royal, she froze in amazement. Standing before her was a living double of Marie Antoinette. The same high forehead, the same capricious curve of the lips, and a stately posture that could not be hidden even under cheap fabric. Jean, a fine judge of human weakness, immediately staged a performance for the girl, promising her the patronage of noble personages and a huge reward for playing a tiny role in an innocent court prank. On that stifling August night of 1784, Nicole, trembling with fear and excitement, was secretly brought to Versailles and dressed in a white muslin gown over a slip, exactly like the one in the famous portrait of the Queen by Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun. She was made to wait in the thick shadows of the Grove of Venus, where the scent of roses mingled with the smell of damp earth, and was handed a single rose as a sign of royal favor. When Cardinal de Rohan, blinded by passion, appeared in the darkness of the alley, Nicole, following Jean's instructions, was only to whisper a few words and offer the flower while hiding her face under a hood. She did not realize that at that moment, her hands were committing the greatest crime of the century, and that this timid whisper would become a death sentence for the reputation of the real Queen. The cardinal, falling to his knees before the milliner, was absolutely convinced he was touching the hem of Marie Antoinette's own dress, and it was this certainty that later allowed the swindlers to take the necklace from the jewelers. When the deception was uncovered and the police began making arrests, Nicole Legway fled to Brussels with her lover, but was captured and taken to the Bastille. At the trial, she appeared not as a criminal, but as a frightened child caught in the center of a storm she did not understand. All of Paris followed the proceedings, and public opinion unexpectedly sided with the Baroness, seeing her as an innocent victim of aristocratic intrigue. Her defenders built their line of defense on the premise that a simple girl could not resist the pressure of a noble lady and was merely a passive instrument in someone else's hands. Ultimately, the court acquitted Nicole, and she walked out of the Bastille to the jubilant cries of a crowd that saw her release as a personal defeat for the hated Austrian woman. However, her fame was short-lived and bitter. After the trial, she tried to build a life, married, and even published her memoirs in an attempt to wash away the stain of disgrace. But the shadow of the great scandal haunted her everywhere. Nicole Legway died in obscurity and poverty only a few years later, not living to see the day the real Queen ascended the scaffold. It was said that in her final days, she often sat by the window, watching the passing carriages, and in her clouded gaze, one could still read that strange, ghostly majesty that for one night had made her the most powerful woman in France. Her life became living proof that a chance trick of nature can become a fatal curse, and a physical resemblance to a deity, a road to the abyss. Nicole's fate dissolved in the chaos of the Revolution, leaving behind only a few lines in court records and a legend of how a simple milliner, with one movement of a hand holding a rose, helped bring down a throne upon which sat a woman whose face she had so unwittingly and tragically stolen.